Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. If you've ever wondered why reading feels so different from day to day in your homeschool, or why one lesson is smooth and the next one is an uphill climb, this episode is for you. Today, we're looking at the 5 pillars of literacy from a more connected and practical lens. Instead of treating phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension as isolated skills, I'll show you how each one is woven into a child's sensory world, routines, and relationships, and why that makes all the difference in homeschooling. We'll talk about environments that invite learning, habits that build confidence, and the subtle reasons a child's body and brain might resist or lean into reading. This approach matters because parents see the full picture. Academic progress and daily life blend together, and recognizing the signs beneath reading struggles lets you reframe tough moments, offer the right support, and help literacy grow in ways that feel meaningful and sustainable to your family. Now, before we get started, I have 2 things. 1, thank you to our title sponsor, CTC Math. You'll hear more about them later in the episode, but it's important to note that without them, there would be no OT is In. And number 2, be sure to download the Why Reading is Hard and What Do I Do About It? It is linked in the show notes. Now, let's get started. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In. Before we get practical on all things literacy, let's quickly anchor ourselves in what the 5 pillars of literacy actually are. Now, they were established by the National Reading Panel as the essential building blocks for teaching reading. So they are 1, phonemic awareness, hearing and manipulating sounds. Number 2, phonics, which is connecting sounds to letters. 3, fluency, which is reading smoothly and accurately. And 4, vocabulary understanding and using words. And finally, 5, comprehension, which is making meaning from text. Now, these pillars are research-backed, neurologically aligned, and foundational across learning approaches. But something we don't talk about enough is this. These pillars do not exist in isolation. They sit inside your family, your culture, your environment, your routines, your child's sensory profile, and even your teaching style. That's where both Charlotte Mason's philosophy and OT come together. Charlotte Mason was a British educator in the late 1800s, and you hear me talk about her a lot. I think her philosophy is fantastic and fascinating, and her philosophy still deeply influences homeschooling today, including my own. She believed education should nurture the whole child, not just academics, through rich environments, good habits, and a meaningful life of learning. In fact, one of my favorite Mason quotes is, "Education is an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life." So today I want to connect that philosophy directly to those 5 pillars because it fits perfectly. Charlotte Mason described atmosphere as the environment that your child grows in, the habits, sensory richness, relationships, the things they notice simply by living in your home. For literacy, atmosphere looks like books that are left out on coffee tables and nightstands, family read aloud baskets, hearing expressive, beautiful language throughout the day, and a home culture where words and stories matter. These stories help to give our kids roots to both their family, but also roots to desire to learn to read. In OT terms, we might call this environmental scaffolding. This is creating a space that naturally invites reading. Even if your structured lessons are short, your home can feel like a place where literacy is woven into daily life. Now, atmosphere, now let's talk discipline, right? Discipline does not mean rigidity, it actually means habits and intentional practice. And this is where, again, those five pillars can plug in here beautifully. Because discipline and literacy probably means explicit teaching phonics step by step, or practicing fluency, reading aloud consistently, helping your child build vocabulary through conversation, and asking gentle questions that build comprehension. Inside these daily habits, these small, consistent exposures, this builds a competent reader. Okay, so atmosphere, discipline, life. This is my favorite part. Education as a life means reading, it's not just a subject, it's a living thing. It's a way of engaging with the world. Literacy becomes a life when your family is telling stories, when you're out exploring nature and then you read about something that you found, or your child reads signs as you're going along, or recipes when you're in the kitchen, game rules that you're getting ready to play. Vocabulary shows up in your everyday conversation. And all of this allows reading to connect to your passions and curiosity. And this is what adds joy and meaning, which is essential for our struggling readers. Like they need to have this joy and this meaning to have any motivation. In other words, they need to understand the why. So Charlotte Mason gives us a holistic foundation, but let's flip this a little bit and bring in the OT perspective. This further expands the whole child view. Now, I like to do this through the PEO model, and you've heard me again talk about this quite a bit if you're a regular listener. I explain it really in depth in episode 86, but the person and the environment and occupation. Now, let me just give you a little more background in case you weren't listening. Sometimes I have a bias. I think everyone's listened to every single episode, and I know I should not expect that. This PEO model helps us to understand why something feels hard for a child, even when they're bright, capable, and motivated. The idea is it's simple, but it's powerful. The child does the best when their person, so the skills that they have themselves, their environment, so what's going on around them, including even the time of day, and the task are well matched. If any of these are out of alignment, learning can feel really frustrating and overwhelming, even if the child can do the skill. So let's put these two together, right? So the person is your child, the unique body, brain, and nervous system, which includes their sensory processing, vision skills like tracking and focusing, motor coordination and endurance, working memory and attention, emotional regulation, and stress response. Guys, two children can be given the same reading lesson and have very different experiences. Not because one is better, but because their bodies and brains process information very differently. Now, if we look at the environment there, the environment is everything around your child, including noise and visual clutter, lighting and seating, emotional tone, predictability, and routine. So a small environmental change, like we could change the lighting or remove some distractions, and this can dramatically change how your child reads. Now, if we look at the occupation itself, which the task of reading, it includes the curriculum, a length of a lesson, the complexity of the text. It includes like the format, whether we're doing this in worksheets or books, or we're moving around during reading. It's hands-on materials. Sometimes this task in itself, or again, the occupation, how we occupy our time, right? It's asking too much at once, and the child's nervous system simply cannot keep up. Now, when reading feels hard, the OT doesn't ask, or what I'm hoping you don't ask, is what's wrong with you, or what's wrong with this child? Instead, we want to think and look, where does this person need support? Does the environment need adjusting? Does the occupation itself need modifying? This is you taking my OT brain and putting it into your situation. Because often it's not about doing more reading, it's about creating the right conditions for reading to grow. So if this sounds familiar, right? Again, this overlaps perfectly with Charlotte Mason's ideas about atmosphere, discipline, and a life, just with a neurological and a sensory lens layered. So now, from here on out, we're going to walk through each of these 5 pillars, and I'm going to continue to point out ways that you can support the person, the environment, and that occupation. so that reading feels more accessible and less stressful in your homeschool. We will discuss each of these pillars using this OT Charlotte Mason lens right after the break from our title sponsor. And I am so excited to share these sponsors because they literally allow us to continue this podcast. And we appreciate you doing your part in keeping the podcast going by sharing episodes and leaving reviews wherever you listen. In our first few episodes of 2026, we're talking a lot about acceptance and expectance. Accepting where children truly are today and expecting that with the right support, they will grow. CTC Math makes that possible. As an occupational therapist, I see how essential it is to honor each child's starting point without rushing them ahead. And CTC Math's mastery-based approach means that your child stays with a concept until it makes sense. No pressure to keep up with an external pace, no fear of hidden gaps. You have access to all levels at one time, so if fractions are hard, you can jump back to where they were introduced in prior grade levels. This allows us to accept today's skill level and expect steady growth through clear teaching, short lessons, and a structure that reduces overwhelm. With built-in progress tracking, you'll always know that your child's strengths and the next step in their learning, acceptance of the present, and confidence for the future. Be sure to check the show notes for a link to try CTC Math free and a coupon code for 50% off for a year, which is exclusive to Homeschool OT. Because honoring where kids are now is the first step to encouraging them to where they are going. Welcome back. Now let's break down these 5 pillars of literacy. The first is phonemic awareness, and this awareness is hearing the sounds inside words. It's auditory, it's not visual. Let me tell you about a moment that I see all the time in homeschool homes. A parent that's sitting down with their child to start a reading lesson, and the page is open, right? Letters are there, and the parents, can you sound this out? Sound familiar? Or do that? And then the child freezes, right? Might fidget, they're maybe guessing, and they might shut down or say, I don't know, even though you know that they know. But what's happening often in that time isn't a phonics problem quite yet. It very well could be a phonemic awareness gap. So phonemic awareness, again, is the ability to hear and play with these sounds before letters even enter the picture. For many kids, especially those that need movement or sensory input to learn, sitting still and listening quietly just doesn't work. So instead of starting specifically with things that you can even see, try some games with letters and sounds. It's a great way to pass the time in the car without even screens, guys. Picture like you're driving in the car, and this is actually what my car used to sound like. You've got no pressure, you've got no pencils, and you're like, I'm thinking of a word that starts with a B. Can you guess it? They start guessing things. I laugh. Maybe I might say something like a car. And they're like, no, mom. Or then they start guessing and they're like, basketball. Or they see a boy running down the street, right? And then all of a sudden we're together and we're having this conversation. This means that this does not have to be in a structured lesson setting, but instead it's just built into your day. Another time, maybe like you're folding laundry and you're clapping out rhythm. Sorry, when you're folding, but maybe if you're pulling something out and you're clapping out a rhythm and you say the sounds of a word like sh, t, right? And then your child can tap or clap right along with you. And suddenly the sounds make sense because their body is involved, right? From an OT perspective, this works because movement helps the brain to organize sound. Gestures and rhythm reduce the load on your working memory. And then also your environment is feeling relaxed and playful, and the nervous system stays regulated enough for learning to happen. So later, when that same child sees a letter on the page, their brain already knows how to hold sounds, blend them, and move through them because you've practiced this in everyday moments. Now, if your child struggles with phonemic awareness, it doesn't mean they're behind or they're broken. It means that their brain may need sound to be paired with movement, rhythm, and connection. And once that foundation is in place, things become easy. So if your child is struggling here, you might also be seeing some low auditory discrimination, some difficulty with motor tasks, challenges with attention or processing speed. These are all OT domains and completely addressable. If you think this is your child, listen to the episode 64 on auditory processing with Jody Jedlicka. It's linked in the show notes and download the guide on types of OT service providers, also linked in the show notes. Pillar 2, right? This is phonics. So again, I'm going to jump into an example here because I hear about this often in my coaching sessions. This is a child who knows their letter sounds. Like if I'm saying, going through those phonemic awareness, like B says B, C says S, D says D. If you ask them one at a time, what sound does this make? They can answer. But when those same letters appear together on a page, everything falls apart. Maybe they're like in really close to the paper or losing their place often or forget the sound that they just said. Again, they start guessing, right? And from the outside, it looks like a phonics problem. But again, when you slow down and really watch, you start to see something else. Maybe it's the eyes that are working hard just to stay on the line, or their brain is trying to hold sounds, control a hand, track left and stay regulated all at the same time. This is not a lack of effort. In our homeschool, phonics was a huge part of our struggle. When my son was asked to sit at the table and look at a page, his whole body started working really hard. He would wiggle, he would like lean and fall over, definitely losing his place, and oftentimes rushing or guessing, not because he didn't know the sounds, but because sitting still while visually focusing was exhausting for him. So for him, the issue is visual overload, too many letters, too much contrast, too much demand on his eyes. Sometimes the issue is also his body needed to move in order for his brain to think. Then we could change the task. Instead of starting with a whole page, we brought letters into his hands. We would use Montessori wooden letters, the kind you can feel. We would move them across the table as he sounded them out. His fingers would trace those shapes while his mouth made the sounds, and suddenly decoding slowed down in a good way. Other days, sitting still was still too much. So we would move these letters completely across the room instead. And he'd lie on a scooter board and push himself from one side of the room to the other. He'd carrying a letter and saying the sound as he went. Or sometimes he would stomp on stilts and step towards the letters one at a time, building a word with his whole body involved. So here's the key part. When his body was moving, his attention improved. His frustration dropped, and his phonics actually became more accurate. From an OT perspective, again, this makes perfect sense. For some children, movement is not a distraction, instead, it's a regulator. It helps organize the nervous system so visual attention and working memory and motor planning can come online, right? We can begin to do those. So for parents listening, again, this is what I want you to notice. If your child struggles with phonics, watch how they struggle. Do they lose their place visually? Do they fatigue quickly when they're sitting? Do they seem calmer and more focused when their body is moving? Those clues tell us whether the barrier is a visual load, postural control, or a need for movement, not a lack of readiness. Eventually, yes, we came back to reading on the page, but phonics didn't click because he suddenly learned to sit still. It worked because we honored how his body needed to learn first. So if phonics is hard, the reasons may include visual tracking challenges, difficulty crossing midline, fine motor fatigue, low working memory, or visual motor integration challenges. These are all common and they are not character flaws. They're skill areas that we can strengthen. If this is part of your struggle, I have prior episodes on each of these topics that I will link in the show notes. And I'm also linking some of these products that we used in our homeschool, the scooter board and Montessori letters. Please know all of these affiliate links provide scholarships to homeschool OT consultations. The next pillar 3 is fluency. Now, fluency is often where parents start to feel discouraged, not because their child can't read, but because reading takes so long. The child can decode and the words are technically correct, but each sentence is painfully slow, uneven, and effortful. As a parent, you're sitting there thinking about the rest of the day, the lessons you still need to get to, the pile of things that is waiting after this. And here's the part that we don't talk about enough. Children can read our faces before they can read their words. I remember realizing this in our own homeschool. My child was reading aloud, and I was trying so hard to be patient, but my face was giving me away. The pauses, the effort, the time it took to get through a paragraph, even when I didn't say anything, he could feel it. So I changed the environment. Instead of sitting across from him or even next to him, I would put him on my lap. So he's leaning back into me. He couldn't read my micro facial expressions of frustration or concern. All he felt was the steady pressure and support from my body. And his reading changed, not because the words got easier, but again, that environment, especially the emotional environment, changed. Something in me as well. Having your kiddo on your lap changes things. So sometimes fluency struggles aren't about decoding or practice, but instead the nervous system staying regulated long enough to let reading flow. Other environmental shifts helped too, like softer lighting or a quieter space, reading side by side if he couldn't be on my lap, except and not face to face, or removing, sorry, reading side by side instead of face to face, because that removes that audience feeling. And from an OT perspective, fluency depends on more than skill. It relies on breathing, regulation, and felt safety. So if fluency feels stuck, watch closely. Okay, does your child read more smoothly when they're physically close to you? Do they slow down when they feel watched? Do they do better when the environment feels calm and supportive rather than you judging them? Sometimes the most effective fluency support isn't more practice, it's changing where and how reading happens. And when the environment supports regulation, fluency has room to grow. If fluency is hard, here's some things to look for: anxiety or perfectionism, difficulty regulating their breathing, processing speed delays, fear of making mistakes, fatigue from sensory overload. Because again, regulation is a huge part of fluency. Now, pillar four, vocabulary. Guys, vocabulary is the foundation of comprehension, yet gaps don't always show up as mispronounced words. Sometimes a child can read a word perfectly, like hungry, nervous, exhausted, tight, but the word doesn't really mean anything to them. No joke. I've talked to my husband about this repeatedly. For some reason, I cannot remember what the word incredulous means for the life of me. In fact, I told him once, clearly we were joking. It's like if someone comes here with puts a gun to my head and is going to kill me if I cannot define the word incredulous, I'm dead. I'm gone. I don't know. It just will not stick in my brain. So this can happen to our kids for even words that they've heard over and over. Incredulous is in a lot of the books that I read. Still don't know what it means to them. This is where some interoception can come in, right? Interoception is the body's ability to notice internal signals, things like hunger, fullness, tiredness, muscle tension, warmth, a racing heart, or butterflies in the stomach. It's how we understand what's happening inside of our bodies, right? And for some kids, interoceptive awareness is underdeveloped. So they don't necessarily notice or label their internal states. And when that awareness is limited, adjectives, especially descriptive or emotional ones, become harder to understand. And here's what this can look like. A child reads a sentence that says, the character felt exhausted after a long journey. All right, so they can decode every word, but they don't pause because exhausted doesn't connect to anything that they recognize inside of themselves. Now, picture a different moment. That same child has had a long day, their movements are slow, their shoulders are slumped, and your child is and you gently say to them, your body looks exhausted. Your legs work hard today. So suddenly that word has a body reference. From an OT perspective, vocabulary sticks best when words are tied with felt experience, especially for children with interoceptive differences. Adjectives become more meaningful when they're paired with moments of noticing warm, tight, shaky, heavy, calm, alert, uncomfortable. And over time, as children build awareness in their internal states, those words stop floating around and they anchor. Now, maybe if someone could show me what incredulous means, then, well, I could hold it in my memory. So, guys, if vocabulary is feeling weak, watch closely for: does your child struggle most with descriptive or emotional words? Do they understand nouns easily but get stuck on adjectives? Do words make more sense after an experience than before? And again, guys, these are clues, they're not deficits. So when we support interoception through everyday noticing and language, we're not just building vocabulary, we're building meaning. Here's some ways to help focus on this interoception. You can use descriptive language throughout the day. You can connect words to different sensory experiences, like creating a word wall or labeling items in your home. Even talking about when I'm sitting here on this couch, I feel whatever. Or when I'm sitting on that chair, I feel uncomfortable, right? So even just relating to different positions or spots in the environment where you are. You can teach short lists of new words every week and encourage these adjectives because vocabulary is deeply tied to emotional literacy. So, if this is an area where you're struggling, listen to episodes 13 to 16, also linked in the show notes, because these are specific to interoception. Next, pillar five, comprehension. Now, this is about making meaning and where many parents feel confused because a child can finish a chapter, even if you're reading aloud and you're like, so what happened? And you get a blank look or a shrug, or I don't know, right? It's easy to assume that the story just didn't sink in, but there's also something else at play here. And this is where Charlotte Mason's method of narration can be incredibly helpful. In the book Know and Tell, Karen Glass explains that narration isn't about quizzing children or checking comprehension on demand. It's about allowing the child to tell back what they know in their own words, in their own time, and in a form that fits their development. So when you watch children closely, you start to see comprehension show up in some unexpected ways. Like a child who's listening quietly during a read aloud, but they don't answer questions right away. And then later that afternoon, they're building a scene with blocks, right? Or reenacting the story with little figures, right? Or casually mentioning a detail that you didn't even realize that they noticed. That's also narration. From the OT perspective, this makes a lot of sense because some children need time to process language or movement to organize their thoughts. Some need the pressure taken off before their ideas can surface. Immediate verbal responses sometimes can actually block comprehension, not reveal it. So instead of asking like a list of comprehension questions, like at the back of the textbook, right? Change that environment. Read a section and pause and invite the child to tell you something that remember. Or feel like later on, I really want to hear your thoughts. Sometimes narration can look like retelling a story while drawing or acting it out with toys. Sometimes it's explaining it during a walk or summarizing it the next day without prompting. Karen Glass emphasizes that narration is about knowing and telling and not performing. And when we combine that with an OT lens, we see that narration respects how different nervous systems process and express meaning. So if comprehension seems weak, here's some things to watch for. Does your child understand more than they can immediately say? Do they narrate better through play or movement? Do ideas come out later once the pressure is gone? Those patterns don't mean comprehension is missing. They mean that it might be taking a different path. When we allow for narration in all its forms, we give the comprehension the space that it needs to grow. If you want to explore this more deeply, Know and Tell by Karen Glass is an excellent resource for understanding narration and why it works so well for children. It's also in the show notes. Here's some OT strategies that can really work well for this. Story maps or sequencing charts, acting out scenes with toys, or drawing or dramatizing parts of a story, chunking processing into small bites, reducing sensory overwhelm during reading if your child understands stories much better when acting them out or hearing them aloud. Guys, that is incredibly common and developmentally appropriate. All of these together, sometimes you so, with all of these together, I would guess that a lot of you are saying, oh, reading can be hard for my child in one of these pillars, if not more. And parents often, when they're coming to me, they're saying, my child is bright and curious and imaginative. So, why is reading so hard? Guys, here's the truth reading requires dozens of underlying skills that have nothing to do with intelligence. Some of the biggest contributors are eye tracking, convergence, sensory defensiveness, working memory limitations, other executive functioning difficulties, sometimes even postural control and being able to sit and hold your body still, auditory processing, emotional regulation. Guys, rarely is the story that they or you are not trying hard enough. More often, it's these underlying systems that need support. And this is exactly what I do. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I think my child's challenges with reading go deeper than phonics lessons, you might be right. In my private consultations, we explore these sensory needs and executive functioning skills and motor skills and all of it, right? We even look at the environment, your homeschool routines, and the occupation, looking at which curriculums that you're using right now. Then we build a plan that fits you and your homeschool, not a one-size-fits-all program. If you want to learn more about this or get on my schedule, head to homeschoolot.com. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If you want a printable version of what we've talked about, grab that free guide, The 5 Pillars of Literacy, an occupational therapy informed guide for homeschool families. It's yours at homeschoolot.com or at the link in the show notes. And if this episode brought clarity or peace to your homeschool journey, please leave a review or share it with a friend. Guys, I'm Sarah Collins, and this has been The OT is In. Take care. And remember, you are the expert on your child, but you do not have to do all of this alone. The OT is always in. Thanks for being here.